all of us live in some way with type 1 diabetes in our family and ourselves and our kids. Everybody here has a really close connection to it. So it's really an honor to be here and have everybody join us tonight. We are going to focus tonight on the new diagnosis. We've all been through that point too. So we've collected some really smart people and some experts and people who are familiar with it. And we're going to get talked about those. My name is Rob Daly. I'm the executive director of the foundation that puts on the Gales Creek Camp. We have Matt Luttrell, who is also known as Caveman in our circles because he's a former staff member at Gales Creek Camp. Now he works at Randall Children's Hospital, and he's a diabetes educator, and he has type 1, and he's an amazing guy. And also Dr. Selva, who goes by T-Bird at camp. She's one of our camp docs. She's also at Randall. There are two kind of technical guests for the evening. They can answer any of your questions. We've also got a few things that we were chatting about earlier. We thought maybe we could just keep on that conversation. But so those are our two, and we'll let them add to their own lore as we go.
That's great. Thank you. My name's Kendra. I have 3 kids with type 1 who are now 19, 17, and 11, and they were diagnosed respectively at 5, 8, and 4. So we have a lot of collective years at this, and I also have a mom who has type 1. So I have experience of it from both sides. So I am excited about this session, not only for the people who have new diagnoses, but also for the people whose diagnoses aren't so new anymore, but either still have questions or also have lessons to share, because that's kind of what it's all about. So we're hoping that today we can just have a discussion. Kind of if you have questions that you're struggling with or want help or feedback from the community or from our diabetes educator or doctor that are on the call, we encourage you to ask them. I think this is a really hard time, like as people were trickling on, we were saying, the diagnosis is never easy, but especially over the past couple of years, it's been really challenging, I think, for a couple of different reasons. One is this just lack of community and support that you may be able to find in non-pandemic times, that I think is harder for both parents and children to find and lean on during this time. So I think that makes the process even more isolating than it already is. I also think that, especially now with, it's not so much the return to school, but I say that because school right now with the current variant school has been such another, coming up as an issue again. But I think tending to school during a pandemic is also challenging, I imagine, because you probably don't have the same level of dedicated attention from nursing staff at schools that you may have otherwise, or you may not, there's just a lot of priorities that are in play. So that might make the transition a little bit harder as well when you're making the transition to school with your kids. So, and there are lots of other things that I think add an additional layer of challenge to this period. But we have a couple questions that we were going to pose, but before we do that, if there weren't any immediate questions that people had starting out, but is there anything that anyone on the call wants to ask or start out with, anything either that would be helpful to know or something you're struggling with that we can kind of kick the conversation off with, or otherwise we'll just start a discussion with some of the questions that we discussed beforehand. So let me pause for a minute to see if there's anything anyone wants to jump in with.
I'll say that now Matt and the educators man our phones, and they deal with a lot of sick calls, so I'll let him answer to the effect of getting lots of calls from families after vaccines if they're dealing with ketones or high blood sugars. But we're not seeing anyone come into the hospital due to vaccines. What we are seeing are kids coming in with DKA with COVID. And that's kind of gone up in the past since Omicron. And as expected, because more people have it. and it's even though we're saying it's not as illness, people aren't getting hospitalized as much, washes out because the sheer numbers, it's doing what Delta did in 3 weeks, what Delta did in 4 months. So the numbers are causing, more to come in. So I would say that getting COVID places kids with type 1 at risk for getting TKA. Matt, are you guys dealing with any calls for vaccines?
No. So I haven't received any, and I haven't heard of any calls related to vaccines and ketones, or even having, symptomatic or an immune response. What we are seeing, I think like 2 or 3 people called in today, kids getting COVID and being symptomatic and actually having ketones. So I would say a lot more sick calls for kiddos who are unvaccinated that are getting ketones and having to deal with that.
So my question is, I've got the great clarity graphs that go along with her Dexcom, but I can't figure out what the different colors mean underneath the rises. So often in a high, it'll be yellow and then it'll be orange and then yellow again, but can't figure out what that means and can't find any explanation.
That corresponds to the like you're in that higher range or that section of that range the most. Like it's like the heaviest time that you're there. I don't know if I'm explaining myself right, but like because they take into account that area under the curve. And if one day throws you up high and it alters that area, it alters that line, that might be yellow. But if 4 days are all high, then it would be orange. Does that make sense?
So like
it's a stronger
patterns.
pattern.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It took me a while to figure that out too.
I think the insulin pump therapy and the technology now involved communicating with Dexcom and having those algorithms increase and decrease insulin based off of CGM values. I think that's a huge game changer. However, though, my teenagers, if they're not putting in any effort and in any work, like entering carbs in, the system doesn't work very well because a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to be on a pump, it's going to do everything, I don't need to do anything. And that's not the case. The system will work great if we're entering in carbs in every time. Otherwise, it might not work how we envisioned it.
That's often what I work with Matt at Randall, and I've seen too that what I tell kids, and I try to instill it before they go on the pump to remind them that the pump, well, if I don't know if you're going on a semi-closed loop system where, they're reading blood sugars and giving more insulin in relation to that. And it works great for basals overnight. And it does that automatically. And it's great because she's not eating. And so if her hormones are out of, she's releasing cortisol and going to spike at 4 a.m., it's going to give more insulin to counter that. But it can't read when you put something in your mouth. And so I don't doubt that someday they'll figure out a way. Like we must release some type of something that can tell the pump that we're eating. But right now it can't. And it'll sense the blood sugar and try to give mini boluses after the fact. And it doesn't do as good of a job. So I'm just like, anytime something's going towards the mouth, just put it in the pump because you don't have to enter your number anymore. You just have to enter carbs.
The whole system is a game changer, but seeing the level numbers at night, it's like when they first transitioned to these newer pumps, like I truly wanted to like frame the charts. Like it made me feel so happy to see the numbers, to know like there were that many hours where their body kind of got a break because the pump was taking care of things. And that was really lovely.
I think it is overwhelming. It's technology. It adds a whole other layer to education in that you have to problem solve with technology now. And I always blame the pump. like it's a piece of technology. There's plenty of it that can go wrong. And so we say, rip it out. I don't care if you just changed it this morning, you're going to rip it out. You're going to give a shot. We're going to do it again. So that's where, I mean, I think all programs in Portland have an extensive education program to kind of do this stepwise, get the basics down, just like you did when you were first diagnosed, survival skills, how to do this at home. You get the basics down with the pump, and then you can do it. We do advanced pump features where you learn more of the intricacies of pump management afterwards. You know, or like, well, just put them on a pump and that'll fix it. And it's like, well, no, really, you have to be the right kind of patient to be on a pump, and the right kind of family who wants to pay attention to when the pumps fail. And, you know, it isn't a cure. It isn't an automatic, you know, just like we thought insulin was the cure back in 1922, you know, oh my God, it's 100 years this year.
Yeah.
That just hit me. That, you know, that was the cure. Well, it really just transformed the disease into, you know, a chronic management of a condition. Intensive therapy, that's what that's called. When you go on a pump, it's intensive insulin delivery, and you get better results.
My name's Kelsey. For those of you who joined a little bit later, I work in the GCC office, and I was a counselor out there for many years with both David and Matt. And I've had type 1 since I was 7. And I just want to throw in kind of the note of what works for some people or one person doesn't necessarily work for someone else when it comes to pump and technology. There's a lot of options out there and all of them are great. But it's different things work for different people. My husband also has type 1 and he was diagnosed when he was 14, and he is on the Omnipod and I'm on the Tandem Control IQ. And we kind of have talked about how much easier it would be if we had the same sites that we could trade off and on when one of us gets low, but it kind of comes down to Omnipod works better for him and his lifestyle. And I've had a ton of luck with Control IQ. It's been fantastic. But just because, and we see it all the time at camp, you know, there's so many kids out there who are on the whole array of pumps and technology and shots still. And for a lot of people, sticking with shots does work the best. So I think it's worth taking your time, especially in those classes that Matt was talking about, the pump classes. The educators do a fantastic job of walking you through what your options are. And just keep that in mind when you go into that. Have an open mind, because just because someone told you Control IQ is the only thing that's going to help you right now, that's not necessarily true. So keep that in mind.
And I will say too, I have had staff out at camp that are type 1 that are on shots. I know a lot of successful adults who go on their pump for a while and then need a break and switch to shots. So just like Kelsey said, and like we know that not everything works for everybody. As a teacher, I know that. So kind of keep that in mind as you address diabetes questions as well.
I mean, this wasn't all the time, but I felt like, you know, a kid might come to camp and was like, oh no, I'll never do a pump. Like, I'm just going to do injections. And, you know, I feel like everyone, I mean, no one really cares at camp. Like, no one cares if you're on shots, if you're on a pump. They're just there to have fun. But then by like the end of the week, you know, the kiddos going to their parents and saying, oh my gosh, I met so-and-so, they had an insulin pump, and actually that sounds awesome. So it's, I mean, yeah, I don't think there's necessarily like, oh, you're not on an insulin pump, so you must not be doing like a good job managing diabetes.
I love what Matt said right there about they don't really care, right? Like it's not a, but what the best part about camp is that they get to see the options, and they get to see those options not from their parents. Because as wonderful of a job as all of you are doing, you're never going to be the coolest person in your teenager's eyes yet. It will happen when they're in their 20s or 30s, I promise. But getting the chance to talk to their peers and say, hey, what works for you? Oh, that doesn't work for me. Or, oh, I might like to try that, is the most powerful thing. And it's just like our whole thing at camp is let's give these kids an opportunity to forget about their diabetes, but then also learn about their diabetes and just share those experiences with each other, which at the end of the week, if they come back and they're like, hey, I want to try something new, or they're like, oh, I got to see some things and I know, like, I think I'm doing the right thing now. Either way, we're empowering those kids. And that's such a huge part of what we try to do out there. So yeah, Matt, you're so right.
The greatest thing I heard when I knew it was the right call is when my son said, when we got him on the type of therapy he's on right now, where he said it's the closest he's felt to not having diabetes since he was diagnosed. And I thought, this is the right one for you. Yeah, I'm like, yeah. So if you can find something, whatever is the closest they can get to, that's a good thing to stick with.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kendra. And I think having that skill set of being able to do injections and being able to talk to your doctor and work with them on ratios like that gives people the freedom to take pump breaks. Because like I think Selena was saying, you forget that by going on a pump, you're now accepting that this is literally part of your body. Like I walk into a doorknob on accident and it hits my pump and I say, ow, even though it didn't touch my actual body at all. And so I have a lot of friends, I haven't myself, but I've been very tempted to do pump breaks, even if it's just for a week, where you go off the pump and you go back to those injections. And that's more of the mental health side of type 1, in just having that freedom to walk around without a computer on your hip. But I think what you were saying about just having that skill set is really awesome as well for in those emergency situations.
And I remember too, feeling a little bit of, for people who are considering it, feeling, and I'm not speaking it as an expert at this, but I believe that at least what my understanding had been, that if you try a pump and it turns out not to be the right choice, I don't think there's like the tools you're using for shots are tools that your insurance is paying for anyway, as it's like you have I remember feeling like, oh, what if we make this decision and it's the wrong decision? And the doctor was like, you go back to shots. Like, it's not like this is what you've committed to for 3x number of years. So it felt a little bit like, a little bit less risk, like a big risk that you had to jump into. And I do think, the pump breaks are also not mental health for sure, but also there are times where we haven't done this, but we've contemplated doing it, where if there are scenarios like in the summer, we spend some time with my family at a lake, and especially when the kids were younger and they were in the water like 8 hours a day, that's a bit hard time to have a pump because their pumps are not on them. That means they don't have any long acting insulin in them. So even though they were swimming all the time and active all the time, they would tend to run high because they're not coming in periodically to attach and give themselves a bolus. So there are people who, or they don't even totally take a pump break, but they adjust their basals and give themselves long acting. So they're only using their pump, they're only attaching to bolus for food. So there's lots of there are actually, even within pump or non-pump, there are still some variations of how you can approach it depending on circumstances. I know in preparation for this meeting, we talked about kind of some of the common questions you get with new diagnoses. Is there anything that you feel like generally would be good sharing just from that framework of like common questions you hear? It seems like everyone on the call today is a little bit more has a few, at least several months under their belt. So some of those immediate questions might not resonate as much, but I'm wondering just your experience with families and new diagnoses, what kind of questions kind of keep coming back, or anything that we could share that from the lessons you've heard from your experiences or working with families.
Well, I mean, we were asked this when we were prepping, and the one thing that came that I think a lot of families, when they're, deer in the headlights, new diagnosis, whether in the hospital or we're doing this outpatient, is the thing I stress is there's nothing that you could have done to prevent this. I think a lot of family, parents are like, is this what I fed my kid? Is this because I didn't breastfeed? How is this my fault? you know, because we're parents and we want to take responsibility for everything. And there is nothing that could have been done to prevent it. It was good. Was it Matt, you're ticking, the kid's a ticking time bomb. Like, it's gonna happen. We don't know the triggers. We now think COVID may be one of them, but like, we don't know the triggers that cause the autoimmune process, but you know, it's bound to happen in those kids who have the antibodies. It's just a matter of time. So that's a big common. And I see parents just relief, or, you know, that's eating away at them when their kid is first diagnosed.
Yeah, I think that bears repeating even when people cognitively know it, because there is an emotional piece to it that, I mean, I fell prey to with our third, even though I have like my mom and the other ones, and I still was like, but was there something, you know, and especially when it keeps happening. So I do think that that is important to just, especially because it's not always the messaging you get from people who don't have knowledge about it. So it's good to remind yourself of that, even when you know it, it's good to emotionally support yourself in it.
Karin, that's you.
I have another case where it was a little baby who came in at 2 months of age. Now, this is not type 1 diabetes. This is neonatal diabetes. And she has a genetic mutation, and there was absolutely nothing that this mom could have done to prevent this from happening. And with neonatal diabetes, it's not an autoimmune process where the you know, body attacks the pancreas. It's a genetic issue, so the pancreas can't make insulin. So treatment's the same at the onset anyway, until we know the genetic mutation. And this mom associated it with her 2-month immunizations, and couldn't get it out of her head that because it was a time correlation. And I think that's the same thing with your daughter. I do not think that the vaccines, we are not seeing type 1 present in vaccinated kids with a higher rate. We're seeing type 1 present in the unvaccinated kids with a higher rate. So I don't think it was the COVID vaccine that brought on your child's diabetes, if that can provide you any reassurance. And I think you did good by protecting her and your loved ones by getting her immunized.
Hi. Gosh, I couldn't have put it better. I think the story you just told really highlights the power of, we just have this cognitive bias where we want to find a cause. And when something is temporarily related to something else, we just want to link them together. It's a really powerful thing. I get it. We all do that. And there's also, you know, what you mentioned about I think the most important thing that I always tell every parent of a kid who's just diagnosed, there's 3 things. I always say, 1, you didn't cause it. 2, your kid's going to be okay. And 3, you can do this, you know, because I also think a lot of families are wondering, can I do this? These are a lot of questions that actually don't get asked, but I know that they're in the back of everyone's mind.
Yeah.
And the one about causing it is really strong. Oh my gosh, when I realized that and I started bringing that up to families, I mean, at least half the time I get tears, because there's so much relief, you know, that you know, that it's not their fault. So anyways, you know, in response to the question about the vaccine, you know, there hasn't been, you know, no studies have shown any association. This is the most studied vaccine of all times. And so anything that happens, you know, gets reported, and so there are groups of people combing the data and looking for any association between, you know, anything like diabetes and the vaccine, and they haven't found any increased rate. but that's not true of the COVID infection. So, yeah, so I would definitively say, that you shouldn't carry any guilt about the vaccine at all.
Type 1 is also a really unheralded condition to look out for. So there are signs, but you generally oftentimes only sort of know the signs if you have experienced it or someone you know has experienced it. It's not universal. It's not well communicated. I think it's getting a little bit better, but I think that is not at all uncommon, that because it can be subtle, and it can be so incremental, and it's incremental until it's not. And then it feels so severe, and you wonder, oh, this has been happening incrementally over the past 3 months. How did I not see it? And you're not trained to see it as a parent. There are things that mimic just developmental, like your kid's thirsty, your kid's cranky, your kid's like, these are all norms of developmental stages and patterns. So it's really hard if you don't know what you're looking for. And I guess I'd say this from having my mom is, we knew what to look for, but now all of you may be helping other families who now will know what to look for, and you're, passing it on. So there will be other more informed people who could potentially catch it earlier with other kids. So there's something there.
I also hear very frequently too, well, we thought he was shooting up and that's why he looks skinny. A very common one, or he's having a growth spurt. And then we see a big surge or blip, or, we get a lot of new onsets right after school starts. And that's because all summer long, they're drinking a lot, but their families think they're drinking because it's hot. And the kids don't tell you they're up 3 or 4 times a night peeing. I ask that of every kid, and 9 times out of 10, the parents like, why didn't you tell me? And they're like, I'm just peeing a lot. Like, they don't say anything. They don't complain about it. And so then they go to school and they're asking to go to the bathroom all the time. And that's when something might, pique the parents' interest, when the teachers kind of report back. So yeah, it's hard not to blame yourself, but you're, like you said, you're not trained.
Want to go and talk about diabetes the whole time. We do all the traditional summer camp stuff. So we go on hikes. We do a creek hike, which is super fun. We play all sorts of games in the field. We have arts and crafts. We have archery. We've got a pool. We have camp dances for the older grades. We have campfires. We eat s'mores. There's a small portion where we kind of let the docs run a short class, and that makes up, in the past,
like an hour or two,
about an hour, an hour of our entire week out there. We have something for everyone. If you were saying he's a big time athlete, perfect. We'll see him up on the basketball courts. We'll see him in the pool, all of those things. We try and make it so that camp is to bring in as many campers as possible. So there's an activity for everyone every day. And then we give them choice to pick what those things are for themselves. And then the only difference is, before we go to eat, we check blood sugars. That's about it.
There's a lot of campers who come out of camp and they say, this is the one place that I feel like I can forget that I have type 1. And part of that is because everyone around them does, so they don't feel like they're the only one. But the other part is just the involvement of the healthcare staff, and the counselors do a lot of the management for them. And especially for middle school teenagers who are starting to take on that responsibility themselves, it's just a break for them to just let the staff take care of them, and they can just be a kid, which they don't get to do a lot of the time. So if I could tell him anything, I would tell him, how does a week where you don't have to focus on type 1 sound?
One time my daughter was playing at Bullwinkle's and she was like 4 years old, and a kid was like pointing at her pump and all the tubing and whatever. And that happens. Like kids are playing on the playground and kids are like, what is that? And she's 4, doesn't have the best, like she doesn't have a really good response to that. But so I was like about to march over and be like, let's go to this other play area. And that girl who was pointing at it pulls out an identical pump. It was like the best moment ever. They're both like 4 years old and they both have these identical little pink pumps. And now they've been like best friends since that day. They both go to camp. They both like, yeah, it's just amazing. I love that situation where you see that other kid, that other person, and you see their like equipment and you're like, hey, because like you totally understand each other right away. You're like, I don't even know you, but I get you. It's the best.
Yeah.
She feels like she's kind of alone sometimes in it. So to see that girl, and the girl was close to her age, and it was an awesome moment.
Now imagine that times 60. Imagine every person you see is that.
So the real answer, the correct answer, if we were in the hospital, I'd say change it out every day. The real answer, like I haven't changed out my lancing, my finger poker, the needle. I don't know. It's been like probably a month. So it's only gonna get dull. So usually if I'm poking, I'm not getting any blood, then I'll change it out. But the real answer, yes, you could change it once a day if you wanted to.
That is probably my favorite question that has been asked on any of our hope-mongering sessions. And I will tell you why. It means that you are fully part of the T1D community now, because the Lancet change is pretty much just a running joke. Not saying you shouldn't do it. You definitely should listen to Matt. He's given you the right answer. But if you spend any time on Instagram looking at diabetes accounts, inevitably you will find one from New Year's Eve that says, oh, it's New Year's Eve, strike of 12, time to do my annual Lancet change. I know that when I was a kid and Dr. Selva was my doctor at the time, we went in and we saw an educator at the same time. And my mom was like, I just cannot get Kelsey to change her Lancet. It is killing me. And the educator, who's also out at Camp Splenda, said, you know what? Her numbers are great. She has a healthy relationship with her diabetes. If the Lancet is the one thing to go, that's okay. As long as it's not like infecting your finger, you're okay. So like I said, listen to Matt, he's the professional, but welcome to the inside joke of everyone with type 1.
On that note, Rob and I were just saying, as we were preparing for this meeting, that we were talking about, I don't know, the gifts, the upsides to having diabetes in your life. And we were both saying one of the upsides, it's the community, the people you meet and the community you make, and the people that are in your life that wouldn't have been in your life otherwise. And there's definitely something to that. So, and you need it, and it's fortifying. So everybody.
It's 8 o'clock now. And so I always have to be the guy to break in and say, it's 8 o'clock, and we appreciate everyone spending an hour with us. And this has been a really great conversation. And it's just, I just appreciate everybody being here. If you want to stick around, Matt and Dr. Selva will stick around for a little bit longer if you have any follow-up questions. But to me, it's amazing how similar our experiences are and how similar we feel about all of this, like how the guilt we feel and I wish I could change it. I wish I could take it.
I just put a plug in that if families have, as you think of topics or issues that you'd like to see discussed, to reach out to GCC and let us know. We kind of collect them on an ongoing basis, but it's always good if something should like throw it in the pool so that we make sure we're being responsive.
And I also want to put a plug in for all of you who are newly diagnosed. First full summer of camp this summer in a while. That'll be family camps for the really young ones. That'll be overnight camps for everybody 3rd grade and up. And then also, if your camper is unsure, especially I think about you teenage families, teenagers are unsure about most things. Kelsey is an amazing resource. She will talk you out of or into anything without you realizing it and make you feel so happy about it. We also have a ton of other staff that are fantastic and are more than happy to, shoot a quick DM to or email. Or if you have any questions about upcoming camp, we're always here to answer them because it really is the best place on earth. We were talking about it at our prep session, and Dr. Selva was like, you see kids make friends literally forever. Like we talk about friends forever out at camp, and it's kids make friends. We've seen, like Dr. Selva said, marriages and families start, out as campers that then grow up in after camp, start families and all of that. But it's all those things that are the important stuff that you don't really think about, that you aren't sure your camper is going to find that type of connection. And there's no other place where they can find that type of connection, to be honest, which is why, we have Matt willing to come back and do a session with us because he was a camper and then he worked out at camp as a counselor and a nurse. And we have Dr. Selva coming out to camp year after year after year, volunteering her time to come out and bring her family out and be a part of it. It really, truly is such a special place, and anything we can do to get your kiddos out there, we will do it. And if you give us a week, I'm convinced they'll come back as long as they can. I take that as my personal challenge to make sure they do so.